I'm Kitty from Gingerella Makes, and I'd like to take this time today to talk to you about something that has become a major part of my life recently, which is my father's severe stroke. What do you do when someone you love suffers from a stroke? How do you support caregivers in this challenging time? Now, normally I post on my channel about uh, my cooking or baking or other type of visual projects, but I'd like to dedicate a portion of this channel to stroke information and to talk to you about our journey. In this video, with the permission of my mom and dad, I want to share about our experience during the first few months after my father's stroke incident. At this time of publication, we are about 5 months post-stroke. If you're listening, you've probably dealt with or are dealing with somebody who has had a stroke, or perhaps you're just curious and want to know more about our stroke story. First of all, my heart goes out to you who are dealing with stroke in your lives. We often look for answers from other people's experiences, but I think you'll find as you go on that each person's journey is so different because of where the damage occurs in the brain, also unique characteristics of the stroke survivor, and the types of resources available to you. What we do have in common, though, is the reality that this is not an easy journey, and there are changes and challenges that we must go through. Our lives can be upended in a matter of moments. My father was always a quiet man, for as long as I knew him. His main activity after retiring from being a chef was being outside and growing vegetables, taking care of the lawn, trimming the trees, and feeding his fish and the birds in the backyard of my parents' house. Mom was more talkative and more administrative minded. She handled a lot of the affairs of their business, such as bookkeeping, financial reporting, and organizing documents. After they closed the restaurant a few years ago, they decided they would do a little more traveling. They especially wanted to go back where they were born, Hong Kong, since the last time they had been there was around 1989. On the night that my father had a stroke, my parents and my husband and I had gone out to eat. It was 2 days before Mom and Dad were supposed to go back to Hong Kong, and they wanted to let us know what needed to be done around the house while they were gone for 5 to 6 weeks. At the restaurant, Dad suddenly complained of a terrible headache. I thought maybe it was just a migraine. I knew that headaches weren't something he normally got, so it did seem out of the ordinary, but I still didn't think that it could have been any more than just a headache. We took him back to my parents' house, and after my husband and I left, Dad told Mom he couldn't see things in front of him clearly. Mom called me while we were about 20 minutes away, then we realized that Dad could be having a stroke. Mom ended up driving Dad to the ER, and he collapsed right outside the hospital. Thankfully, someone was coming out of the building and helped my parents get Dad inside. When my husband and I got there, the ER doctor told us to prepare for the possibility that my father might not make it through, and he confirmed that Dad did have a severe stroke. When I got this news, I thought of the last moments with my father as he was. I thought that perhaps the last conversation we had could have been the last words I would ever hear from my father again. I was grateful that it wasn't an argument or anything that left us on bad terms. The hospital transported my father to their main campus for continued observation, and a few hours later, due to the extensive damage from the stroke, they brought him in for an emergency surgery. He apparently had an ischemic stroke, or a stroke from a blood clot, that worsened and became a hemorrhagic stroke, and it occurred on the left hemisphere of his brain. This is the area primarily responsible for such activities as language processing, right-side motor control, and analytical thinking. With stroke damage, it's hard to know what to expect and how the damage would present in Dad's cognitive and motor functioning until things start to settle in his brain, which, in my dad's case, took several months. His first surgery was to remove the blood and the blood clots. I did not know until recently that blood in the brain is toxic to the neurons and damages the brain tissue. A few days after the initial surgery, there was so much swelling that his brain was pushing on his brainstem, which, if not addressed immediately, could cause permanent vision damage or perhaps even death. Therefore, another surgery was needed to remove a part of the skull, which we call the skull flap, so that his brain could have space to move. They left the skull flap off for approximately 8 weeks. During this time in the ICU, one of the doctors was trying to communicate with me and Mom about healthcare directives and what Dad's wishes would be if he needed to go on life support. In our family, there's never a good time to talk about this subject. Mom became upset when I tried to communicate with her because she was trying to stay hopeful and avoid discouragement for herself and for Dad. We had never approached this subject before because we have different perspectives and beliefs about life and death. Did Dad want all measures taken to preserve his life? There is all indication to the affirmative, even though later, in the throes of depression, he would say he wanted to die. After this surgery, while Dad was still in the hospital, Mom stayed with him 24/7 unless I was there to help and she could drive home, which is 40 minutes away. So when I was able to watch Dad, Mom would go home to take a shower, wash some clothes, and then she'd be right back afterwards. Her health, in addition to my father's, is on my mind as she is older and more frail than ever. Her eyesight is not as good and she has some health problems. While taking care of Dad, she cannot get a good night's sleep since she is constantly addressing his needs day and night. Weeks before the stroke, my parents were thinking about what they needed to bring for their trip and about the places and people they were going to visit. Let us then remember that the best laid plans of mice and men often go wrong or even change. They didn't get to Hong Kong in October, but looking back, we're grateful he didn't have the stroke midair or overseas. Having spent several weeks in the narrow ICU, Dad was then transferred to step-down unit until he could be discharged to another facility. Mom was still doing a lot of changing diapers and helping Dad, who was mostly incoherent. The social worker at the hospital was in charge of getting him to the next place and communicating with the insurance company. His options were skilled nursing or an intensive rehab facility, but he was not ready for the latter because his body and brain needed a lot more time to heal. Dad was then transferred to the skilled nursing facility after he left the hospital. I was probably there 4 to 5 times a week and would stay overnight one night out of the week so Mom could go home and get some rest. Our friends came to visit Dad as well, so Mom was able to go home then and do some chores before coming back. The facility was about 4 minutes away from my parents' house, so I wasn't as concerned about her driving back and forth. We changed a lot of diapers and stayed up a lot throughout the night to make sure that Dad didn't hurt himself involuntarily. He had a peg tube placed in his stomach while he was at the hospital and had problems early on with wanting to pull the tube out or trying to get out of bed. In order to be able to eat by mouth, he had to relearn his swallowing function or else risk aspirating if the food went into the wrong pipe and got into his lungs. But the feed formula that he was placed on caused really bad diaper rash because he didn't tolerate it well and it didn't have any fiber. So liquid in, liquid out. This caused open sores which hurt my dad and bled and made it difficult to do a lot of the therapy because Dad would be so uncomfortable sitting or standing. He had started occupational and physical therapy in the hospital, and now at the skilled nursing facility, he restarted those and also speech therapy. The severity of his condition meant that they could not do much because Dad was very lethargic, medicated a lot, and also very weak. So I think at that time, it was just seeing how much he could tolerate and do. The goals of therapy included working on swallowing, standing for short periods of time, and keeping him sitting also for more extended periods of time and not just laying in bed. If you continue to lay in bed, that could have a negative effect on your vestibular function. In the nursing home, Dad also started to become depressed and had hallucinations and insomnia. So we had to think about things that could be possibly triggering hallucinations. And hallucinations are kind of like having a dream while you're still awake and taking in visual input through your eyes. So Dad was pretty much sleeping during the day and awake and restless at night. The insurance company stopped paying for skilled nursing and we could have made an appeal, but we decided to see if we can take him home and get some home health care. On the first day he went home, Dad had a major seizure. We ended up in the emergency room. But he was able to come back home shortly after that, and then we started working with a home health care agency who was able to provide, through insurance, weekly visits from the nurse and some occupational, physical, and speech therapy. They were all very helpful and provided what we needed at that time, but I could see then that Dad would benefit from a higher intensity of therapy as his mind healed. Now, after they had retired, about a year and a half before this all happened, Mom and Dad had renovated a large separate garage area for my home bakery at their house. After Dad left the nursing home, Mom and I moved him into that building, which was fully furnished, had a large kitchen and a bathroom, and was on one floor and had a double door entrance. Little did they know, when they were remodeling my home bakery, it would be his home for the next 4 months after his stroke. So now with Dad at home, Mom has become his primary nurse and caregiver all day and all night. We made a schedule for Mom at home that included administering 8 to 10 different medications in the morning and evening with water every 4 hours. Dad initially was on a peg tube feed constantly and still had bad diaper rash. Mom did everything she could do in order to control the diarrhea. She needed to keep Dad really clean. We were using zinc lotion and talcum powder. Finally, we used Calmoseptine, which was also very helpful, but cleaning Dad was very painful for him, and he was bleeding and scared. I got the idea to use a spray bottle to try to gently wash the area, but you really need to keep it dry in order for it to heal. At home, Dad was able to swallow soft foods like porridge and oatmeal and gelatin, and Mom really wanted him to get off the peg tube, but she couldn't because he wasn't eating enough. He had lost about 15 to 20 pounds since he had been first admitted to the hospital. He was still cognitively on and off, and his speech was all over the place. He had begun to speak while he was in the skilled nursing facility, but suffered from aphasia. Sometimes what he says is intelligible, but most of the time it's not. Dad knows 3 languages, and I believe that this actually could be helpful in some ways in recovery, but we definitely needed help from a speech therapist. You could tell which language he was trying to use as he displayed the inflections, but you couldn't understand what he was saying. I do believe, though, that there are times when Dad does understand what people around him are talking about. About 10 weeks after his initial hospitalization, Dad's skull flap was placed back in. Once he was stable after that surgery, they transferred him to an acute rehab center for a few weeks of intense therapy. This was after I needed to make an appeal to the insurance to cover that. Still, Mom was providing nursing care for Dad, for the most part didn't leave his side, but the rehab center nurse wouldn't allow Mom to stay overnight. At this point, Dad was still tired from trying to recover from the surgery and was also very weak on his right side. We took him home shortly after beginning acute rehab because he wasn't feeling comfortable in the strange place. Imagine having memory loss and not seeing any familiar face when you wake up. There was also a great concern about the nursing care he was receiving, so we thought it best he go home, and we would try then to get him to outpatient therapy that was highly recommended. We got him into outpatient therapy for occupational and physical therapy. They also recommended a speech therapist and behavioral ophthalmology since Dad was having problems with his eyesight. He was seeing double and his field of vision was very limited. Even though my father is alive and medically stable at this point, he is not the same person that I knew before. While I have been so busy helping my mom take care of him, coordinating and getting him to and from appointments, medical appointments, therapy appointments, um, making sure that he has all the things that he needs at home, medications, any types of like materials such as diapers or medical devices, and then also keeping an eye on my mom as well and helping them um, just do very normal things that are just much harder now. Uh, I had not the time to really grieve the relationship that I had with my father before the stroke. It's just, you just keep having to move and keep going and just survive each day. But I think you really need that time to kind of reflect and kind of think through the things that you had gone through emotionally, but there's just no time to do that. However, I can tell you um, that a new type of relationship is being formed between me, my mom, and my dad, one that's more intimate than ever. And I am glad that God has given us this blessing, even though we had to go through a horrific incident. And so I hope that this video serves to encourage you and help lessen the feelings of loneliness and isolation and fear. And I hope that I can in the future provide more resources and reflection that will continue to benefit you who are going through such a difficult time. And so, if you have a need for prayer, or if you are wanting to talk more, please drop a comment. And I hope to be able to respond to your comments and to at least pray for you through this. So I will see you soon. Bye.